Thank you for joining us once again. My name is Carlos Vasquez, doctoral candidate in psychology and the host of Circle of Insight, where we discuss the topics you have chosen with leading experts. The motto of Circle of Insight is, wherever there's psychology involved, we will be there. Today we will be talking about ISIS, or better said, ISIL. We're going to find out where they came from and what they're really up to. Today our special guest is Dr. Mohammed Amarkizi. Thank you so much, Dr. Mohammed, for coming forward.
Pleasure, Carlos.
Let's give a little background for Dr. Mohammed. Dr. Mohammed has a doctorate in international politics. He's senior director of the GPRA Group, which is a global politics risk assessment group, and he's in charge of the Middle East and Central Asia, the senior director. He was also a former UN director of drugs and crime in Afghanistan, as well as the senior advisor of the UNODC. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Dr. Amarkizi. This is a very hot topic, and it's going on right now because, unfortunately, it's a big problem. Originally, in the beginning of the year, we know the administration thought it wasn't a big problem. They thought there were just some kids basically doing some radical things in a really small, concise area. They didn't seem organized. They didn't seem like they knew what they were doing. Unfortunately, now we find out they do know what they're doing. It seems like they're getting a lot of money from unknown sources. Maybe you can provide some of those. We don't know. We'll find out. And the show really wants to explore more about this ISIS. But the first thing, I know from previous conversations with you, there is a difference between ISIS and ISIL. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
In the beginning, they were called by the Western media when they translated. They called it Islamic State for Iraq and Syria. But actually in Arabic, what they mean, Daesh, is Islamic State for Iraq and Levant. The countries that consist of now Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Palestine.
Okay. So
they call themselves Levant because what they consider to be is Islamic State. They wanted to be a state controlling all these areas. But now, for short, they are going with the Islamic State.
Islamic State. So that leads us to the question, where did ISIL come from? Because it seems like they came out of nowhere. I didn't hear about them 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm. They were there. And let me perhaps start by explaining their origin, getting the help from what Vice President Biden said a few days ago at Harvard, a couple of weeks ago, and then, of course, it was, there were complaints by the countries who they mentioned the name, but the gist of what he said was that from 2006 to 2010, the jihadi groups in Iraq started to create problem for the security of Iraq. U.S. was interested in a stable government in Iraq. So U.S. spent a lot of efforts to weaken these jihadi groups, among them Iraq's Al-Qaeda, and to get them out of Iraq. But at that time, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey promised to help, and also the Sunnis in Iraqi Sunni areas. And they were paid very well by the U.S. to doing so. But what happened is that they did not destroy it completely.
Now, they were going by the name ISIL at that time?
At that time, no, they were going with the name of the Jamaat, which was the Iraqi Al-Qaeda.
Okay.
So, and there were different groups, smaller group, jihadi groups all. So they were all thrown up to Syria. And at that time, at 2010, the US was successful to get these groups out of Iraq. But what Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Emirates and Turkey did was to support them financially in Syria, creating problems for the Syrian government. They started the uprising there. So the hope was that they will change the government in Syria, and then they will come back to Iraq when they are stronger. So they were kept alive by these countries, which I mentioned, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Qatar, and Turkey, when they promised that they will destroy it. But they wanted to keep them to help them whenever they needed that. And the point is, and I say why they need it, Iraq before 2003, when the Americans went there and changed the government and overthrew Saddam, it was a Sunni country, a dictatorial, and a minority, which were the Sunnis, were controlling the Shias, who were the majority, and the other minority, which were the Kurds. So at that time, there was kind of a balance of power. Saddam, being his policies were in line mostly with Saudi and Turkey's ambitions, and also Syria, which was not in line with Iraq. They had both same Ba'athist party, the both countries, but Syria's one was different from Iraq later on. It was kind of a changes policies and was closer to the Soviet Union and Syria. So what happened is that after 2003, when Saddam was overthrown, the balance of power was tilted. Iraqi new government, which came to power based on the democratic rule with the majority of Shias, was a Shia government. The majority of the members of parliaments were Shia. So the prime minister elected by the parliament was a Shia. And the president was a Kurd. Sunnis was left, but they were left without much power, both politically and economically. Oil fields are mostly in Kurdish areas and Shia areas. Sunnis have no oil fields.
So they're not taking advantage of that economically.
So they couldn't. So they wanted to go to the older times when they were taken care of by the government. So these things this change of policies prompted the Saudis to spend the money and create these jihadi groups in the name of religion. They have nothing to do with religion. They were created in the name of the religion so they can destabilize the government in Baghdad. So they would, by that, they would kind of control the good relations between Iraq and Iran.
So they're almost like secret forces.
They are mercenaries.
Mercenaries.
They are thugs.
And you were calling them like a...
They are organized group. They are organized criminal group. They are like new mafia. They they put this religious emblem on their name to give legitimacy to their work.
Is it also to attract followers as well?
To attract followers. And many innocent people go to them as followers. But many people go there for the thrill of being a criminal. They go there, they kill people, they behead people, they torture and rape women and children, and they sell women. They just like to do that. And now they have lots of oil fields in their control in Syria and Iraq. And they are making good money out of it.
How much do you think? Do you have any ideas?
It's estimated that in the last 6 months they have made $2 billion.
$2 billion.
$2 billion.
Wow.
And
that's from their selling women, drug trafficking.
Yes, the drug trafficking, taking hostages, getting ransom. They are in all sorts of criminal activities. So with the push that the U.S. government recently in 2014 put on Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Turkey, they promised to stop sending money to these people.
Now, why would they send them money to begin with? Because they're still funding that secret force?
Yes, because they want to destabilize, because they want to change the...
that's right, Syria.
The political geography of the region. because Iraq has tilted, is now closer to Iran. Syria is closer to Iran. And that creates difficulty for them. The balance. That's why they went to Libya and overthrew after 2011. They overthrew Gaddafi in Libya because they wanted to have more power in the region. They were losing their powers. They lost Iraq. And they didn't have Syria. Syria was getting closer to Iran. So they started all this. And then they got the help from the Sunnis in Iraq, who also lost the control and the interest that they had. So these forces, Sunnis inside Iraq, with the foreign governments who had different interests, they got together and started these activities to destabilize the government. And they were successful.
And now they're out of control.
That's a different thing. But they destabilized the government. And they blamed Maliki, the prime minister, that he was not putting, let's say, a national government together. And that's why they are opposing him. He was just a scapegoat. The Sunnis never supported Maliki.
They never liked them.
They never supported Maliki. And they just blaming everything on Maliki, of what's happening in Iraq, it's very simplistic. What happened in Iraq after 2006 and up to 2010, when U.S. threw these jihadi groups out of Iraq, was not to the benefit of Turkey and Saudi Arabia. So they kept these groups alive in Syria, and now, for 3 years, 200,000 people have died in Syria. More than 1 million are now refugees.
It's terrible.
I mean, let's say Syria's government was corrupt, inhumane. How many people could have died during their rule?
Interesting point.
And look at what's happening now. So after 3 years, they were not successful to overthrow Assad. So what they did, they came back to Iraq. So to destabilize the government there, and they were successful. Now, the new government which has come, Al-Abadi, the new prime minister, he's very weak.
That seems to be the common consensus out
This
there
is
right
weak.
now.
Because why he's weak? Because Sunnis in parliament, minority groups, I mean, there are groups with 7 or 8 parliament members, they want 50% of the cabinet members.
50.
50. There are groups, Sunni groups, who have no member in parliament. They want 1/3 of the membership. And they are Kurds. They want the same thing. So the government over there is weak. Is not able to do anything. And there are many factors for that. One is that even before that, during, let's say before Abadi after 2006, Kurds are running the sections, the areas that they have, as an autonomous government. They sell their own oil. They don't give any money back to central government. And foreign dignitaries, foreign governments, companies, they go directly to Kurds areas and make agreements and start joint activities, joint ventures, without the knowledge and approval of the central government. So central government is weak because it has lost any control from Kurds. And then now Sunnis want the same thing, same autonomous areas, with the difference that they have no oil in their sections. So they want the central government to give their part, their share of the oil fields revenues in Shia areas. So what's happening now is that the government in Baghdad and the US is trying to stabilize the country. It's trying to bring these factions together.
And just to be clear on something, you were saying the Sunnis want as part of their oil. They want a share of that, of the money coming from oil.
Yes.
Now, that's not the same group that was created by Saudi, Qatar, the ISIL group. That's a different Sunni group.
The Sunnis resident of the Sunni areas in Iraq,
So the non-fundamental Sunnis, I guess you could say.
who are helping ISIL because they are helping ISIL because they want to force the central government to give them a seat on the table.
So now the Sunnis in Iraq are acting like Saudi Arabia, Qatar was. Now they're helping ISIL.
They for their own interests.
So everybody's using the mercenaries for their own interests.
So Sunnis over there, they are using it for their own interests. Saudis, they are doing it, and the Turkey is doing it. Now they have different interests, but they're all using the force for their own interest. The result is the weak government in Baghdad. And if this continues, there is more danger of instability in the country. What happens is that Shias and the United States are trying to strengthen the government, to come to an agreement with all the groups. If Kurds and Sunnis do not join in and establish a strong central government, even with some federal, let's say, federal system, where they have some autonomy, but still a strong central government, then the efforts of the US and the Shias would go to waste. Because sooner or later, Shias are now the only ones who are fighting ISIL. Sunnis have left the army. United States spent 8 years and $25 billion to arm, train, equip the Iraqi army. Yeah. Sunni generals gave away all the areas in their own territories to ISIL. They just left.
That's why they left. They weren't afraid to fight.
No, they just wanted to force the central government to give them more interest, give them a seat on the table, to get economic and political interest. So the generals and the soldiers, they just gave up. They left the...
Where did they go? To join the
army? No, they are there.
Just there.
But they are there. This ISIL now is not only the jihadis that were created by Saudis. This ISIL now, it involves the jihadi groups and remnants of Saddam army people and the old Ba'ath party. So all these people now have joined ISIL because they all have the same interests.
Wow.
In stability in Iraq. So they can continue their rule and with the hope that they can capture the whole Iraq. But they are not going to stop there. And the danger is that the Shias, now the only one that are fighting the ISIL, if they see that Sunnis and Kurds are not cooperating with them in making a strong government, sooner or later, these more moderate forces in Shia who are trying to help the central government would be weakened by more extreme forces in Shia. And what would happen is that Shias would go and establish their own autonomous territories. And then Iraq would be destabilized, for good.
Hi, welcome to Adelante. This is Adelante Recovery, and my name is Yvette Kuglin, and I'm part of the staff.
Adelante Recovery Center has helped people in dual diagnosis for 5 years. We accept most PPO insurances and provide luxury accommodations and 24-hour support. To speak with an admissions counselor, call 1-888-242-4450.
A lot of time we don't even know what's wrong with us, and sometimes we need to get away to figure that out. So if you want to go for a little retreat out in Corona Del Mar, which is a confidential location, we're here to help. So we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
It seems like you're insinuating that Iraq might, if it goes in the bad way, it could divide into 3 parts.
It could.
And that's the worst scenario.
That's the worst scenario.
Okay.
And that would create a lot of instability in the region, create many wars. And then there is also another danger. These people are not going, these ISIL people are not going to stay in Iraq. They are now supporters in the extreme factions of Jordan who are trying to bring ISIL into Jordan.
Now, what's up? Now, why are they doing that over there?
Because they want to gain control.
They want to destabilize their
They
government.
want to stabilize and they want to have more control. So, instability, there is instability, people who want or create those kind of get what they want.
I get you, yeah.
So when they weaken the central government, their demands would be heard by the central government.
They don't have a choice.
They would be
yeah.
given more interest. So that's what they are doing.
So what happened with Syria? Why have they not been able to knock out Assad?
Well,
Because he seems very
because
tough.
The point is that there were some civilian, let's say, demonstration and protest against Syrian government. That was there. But that, the Syrian people themselves did not take up arms to fight Assad. It was the foreign governments who pushed them to do it. These jihadis went from Iraq to Syria. They started it. The Syrians, the political opposition to Syria, sitting outside Syria in Europe and the US, they were not groups that they were taking arms against Assad. That only happened when these jihadi groups started the uprising, and the West tried to use this excuse to get rid of Assad, a partner of Russia and Iran. And so what happened is that we have this mess.
It's a very big mess.
Yeah. So, but this mess, another point that I have, this mess was created now for different reasons. As I said, for the reasons of getting more interest for Sunnis inside Iraq, getting more interest for Turkey, and political interest of Turkey and Saudi Arabia and others. But also there was more economic reasons. And that was that a few years back, Iran, Iraq, and Syria agreed to have a gas pipeline from Iran to the port of Syria, exporting gas to Europe. Syria is on the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
So Iran is the second gas reserve country in the world. It has the second largest gas reserves in the
Iran.
world after Russia.
Ooh, Russia didn't
Russia
like that
is-
idea very much. They did
Russia
that.
has the first gas reserve.
So Russia wasn't very happy about Iran using that pipeline through Syria?
Not only Russia, but many others.
I guess that's true.
Many others. So there were many reasons for them to start it. So, as I said, political, economic, others. But the roots of all these problems, I always try to find the roots. Where are the roots of this problem? And I always end up with the British. British, during World War I, started in 1914. In 1916, they went to this Amir, the governor of Hejaz in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, which was part of Ottoman Empire, and asked him, gave him money and arms to revolt against Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire was fighting against the Allied, the French and the British. They were fighting the Russia, Hungary, and Germany. And Ottoman Empire sided with the losing side. So they wanted to weaken it. They gave money. And the whole section of, let's say, from Palestine all the way to Iraq and Jordan and all the countries down there in the south of Persian Gulf, they were all Ottoman Empire.
Okay.
So what happened is that in 1916, they started this with that king to get the uprising going. And then there is an agreement between the British and French on how to divide the Ottoman Empire after the end of the war in 1918.
Gotcha.
So they divided it, and so they had this secret agreement in 1916. It's called Sykes-Picot Agreement. And in 1970, Russia was also among them.
Russia
At
was
that
part of
time.
that agreement?
Part of that. It was present in the agreement. It had no problem with the agreement. But Russia had the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. So the Bolsheviks, Tsars were overthrown, Bolshevik came, they gave the information about the secret agreement, and everyone found out the French had made 3 agreements with the people there.
3.
3 agreements. So at the end, what happened is that they divided the whole region to 2 mandates under British and French. And they gave these borders, which was just drawn by British.
No reason at all.
No reason. They're all the same people. They just had these borders to divide these people.
I understand
So
that.
there is no difference between Iraqis and Jordanian and Syrians. They are the same people.
And they did that again in 1947 or 46, where the Balfour Act.
The Balfour was also at the same time in over there, but it was only after the World War II the issue of Palestine. But I want to just stay with the World War I section, is that they divided it. And what happened is that they established a kingdom in Iraq and Syria, and the king was one of the sons of the governor of Mecca, which helped them. And they established another kingdom in Jordan for the governor's the other son. So the sons of this governor who helped the British got these 3 countries. And then, later there were revolutions in Syria and Iraq. These kingdoms were overthrown in favor of republics. And Jordan still has this Abdullah dynasty, which
right.
comes from one of the sons of the governor of Mecca during 1914.
100 years ago.
So
Wow.
these borders were drawn, and these people were divided. And all these countries were promised to Saudi Arabia, the governor.
All those countries?
He was
Wow.
promised that if he helped to overthrow Ottoman, he will have all the Arab
those
countries south of Turkey.
Wow.
So they didn't give it to him. And what remains of Ottoman Turkey wanted more coming to south, and they didn't give it to him either. So what you have now is the same fight. Saudis trying to get back what they were promised 100 years ago. And Turkey trying to have a buffer south of his country to make sure that the people who rule there are in line with his policies.
In Turkey.
Because the Turks are
Erdogan.
they are afraid of Kurds. They don't want to give independence to Kurds.
That's the PKK right now they're having issues
And
with?
they are. So the point is, if they can control the government south of Turkey, then Kurds would have no way of asking for independence. They would have no help. They will have no assistance. So Turkey is doing whatever it's doing to destabilize Syria and Iraq for his own benefits, for their own Erdogan.
Wow.
And Saudi Arabia and Qatar, they are doing it for their own benefits. So it's all regional power, trying to become a regional power. And I want to turn now to, if you permit me, if you have any question.
Actually, we're almost running out of time.
Yeah, I'm just saying
Go
that
ahead.
we come to the U.S. policies, how U.S. needs to react to this.
Let's get to the solution. Yes. What do you think the U.S. needs to do? And we'll expand on this more in the future. Hopefully, you'll come back.
Pleasure.
We'll do future episodes getting more into this. As you notice, it's a very complex issue. I mean, right now, Dr. Kamir Kizi took us back to history and saw the chaos that was created today. But that's enough of the history lesson. So what can the U.S. do?
First of all, U.S. has to define It's a strategy. What are the strategical interests of the U.S. in the region? U.S. went there in 2003 with the good intentions of creating a democratic Iraq, stable Iraq. But it left in 2011 without completing its work. And
So you agree that he left too early?
and I'm afraid the same thing will happen in Afghanistan when they leave, because nothing is ready over there.
No.
The vacuum was created in 2011 when the US left. And the vacuum will be created in Afghanistan. So the point is that once the strategic interests are clear, which I believe are stable government in Iraq and the end of hostilities in Syria, then they can find partners, US can find partners to do it. There are countries in the region which have the same strategic interests.
As America?
But tactically, there are political difficulties between them. Iran and the US, they both have the same strategic interest in the region, in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And in Afghanistan, destroying Taliban are in the strategic interest of both US and Iran. And destroying Daesh or IS, Islamic State, is also shared strategically by Iran and the US. Now, there are limitations for the US to cooperate with Iran on that, because that is Saudis actually have said that if US starts cooperating with Iran, they will not join this international coalition.
Oh, really?
And this is another reason for them wanting to make sure that stability in Iraq does not happen, because once there is a stable Iraq, and with the end of the nuclear negotiation coming, which I am certain they would be fruitful and positive outcome, then relations between Iran and US would improve, because they have lots of strategic interests which are similar. And Saudis don't want that. Turkey doesn't want that.
Wow.
So the point is that they will make sure that this thing doesn't happen. So one of the conditions they put was that Iran should not be there. And so given these limitations, there could still be activities not in cooperation, but let's say in silent cooperation. Iran has the same strategic interest as the US. So they both can follow up what the interest and their goal, which is the destroying of the Islamic State.
Without having a visible coalition.
Without having a visible coalition. And this point, as I said, when I said that U.S. left early, is that these aerial attacks, if they are not followed by boots on the ground, it will not be fruitful. After 2 months of aerial bombardment, the Islamic State, ISIL, they have the same area of Iraq under their control as they did.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it's done very much.
It's not helping. You need boots on the ground. So if the US are not going to do that, they have to find credible partners that would do it. Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Kuwait, they are saying, okay, we will give you these soldiers, these advisors, but they should not work in Israel against Islamic State. They should go to Syria and help the moderate factions overthrow Syria. As this is a similar thing they did in Libya.
So they want to knock out Assad's stuff.
That is their goal. I mean, that's all they want. So they are joining the coalition to do that. And with this mess with Turkey, Turkey was not permitting Kurds cross the border to help the Kurds. but they had to change the policy yesterday. They were saying that they want this no-fly zone in Syria, so they can have their own policy and people overthrowing Syria. So everyone is trying to get to their own interests.
Big fight for power.
And these interests are not in line with the US interests. What Saudis and Turkey are trying to do are not to help US achieve its strategic interest.
If it does, it's just a matter of luck.
This is, it's not, it won't. I mean,
It won't align at all.
They would create, and they will create difficulties and chaos. They will keep these groups as pressure groups. And the point is, the only thing is that for United States to have this strategic interest, let's say, written and debated and come to an agreement. And I think the only thing that is preventing the US government from doing it are the next elections. And the election politics is not permitting this debate to take place. Once the Republicans and Democrats sit and debate the issue, identify the difficulties, identify the strategic interest of the US, they would come to an agreement.
Yeah, I hope
And
that
then
comes
there
soon.
would be a forceful response.
I hope that comes soon. Well, I don't know about you, but that was an incredible 35 minutes that we have with Dr. Markizi. I can't wait to have him back to talk more about this. It's a very complex issue. And the sad thing, really, if you look at it, it's not just a geopolitical issue. There's a lot of lives that have been lost, innocent lives that have been killed for this power struggle. And it's one thing I always try to keep in mind is understand the lives of the people that have lost. We've lost fathers, we've lost sons, daughters, and brothers and sisters. And that's a terrible tragedy for this. And the one key point I know Dr. Markizi wants to make sure that ISIL is not really a group. It's not a religious group. It's an organization of the thugs. We want to make that point clear. Remember, all the opinions expressed here on the Circle of Insight are not necessarily represented by me or by Circle of Insight or by Therapy Cable. Thank you very much, Dr. Markizi, for coming for us.
Pleasure.
We enjoyed it so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.